Dave, how long have you been drinking Brook Laddie?
Oh, probably since 2010.
Yep.
Yeah.
2010. Yeah. So for me personally, the first distillery that inspired me to drink whiskey was Brook Laddie, and it was a master class that the diversity of whiskey flavors were just off the hook. Couldn't believe it. And so within one distillery, you could taste from a very fruity, light whiskey all the way through to a heavily peated whiskey. It was sensational. Now, before I forget, this is not a master class, okay? This is a craft class. This is a fun class, right? We want it to be highly interactive. If anyone's got any question or comment, rip it out, okay? It's almost conversational. That's the way. It's Aussie Craft Distillers shoot the shit format. It's loose as a goose, trust me. But have fun. Ultimately, we drink to have fun, right? That's more than fun, we wouldn't do it, right? So, yeah, Brook Laddie Classic, bloody sensational. I haven't tried it yet. So, I have. So cheers, guys.
Yep.
Now, if you don't know the person next to you, say hello now. Now we got it.
Yeah.
Now we go.
Yep.
There we go.
Yep. Now they're gone.
What's that?
Now they're off chatting. That's all right.
Say a few words about Brook Laddie?
Yeah.
Do you want me to say a few words as well?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, guys, settle out. We've got a big night, right? So
Now, I may have done
what?
and started the stream a little late. So you're live now.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Now we're yeah.
Maybe not the intro,
Right.
and maybe not the video.
They'll survive.
I'll edit it in later on.
No, we don't need to edit it. All right, so
So just for everyone's sake, though, just the first one we've done. Say the first one, so catch up.
yeah, okay. Right. So everyone, we've just had the classic Laddie. So the oak barrel for me is my spiritual home. I've done a lot of learning here, right? And one of the guys that I learned from was this man here, who's moved on to Archie Rose many, many years ago. Oh Jesus. Hello. we have a deep love for Brook Laddie. Dave's going to give you a bit of a rundown on Brook Laddie.
Yeah, Brook Laddie was one of the ones for me that really got me going with whiskey, and kind of Craig said it, right? Like in 2010, you kind of see a bottle like this on a shelf, and you think, geez, what the hell is that? You know, and here was a distillery named Mark Renier saved this Victorian era distillery in about 2000, 2001. And, you know, you've got this old Victorian era distillery, like in this rickety old place called Islay off the western coast of Scotland, right? Where, you know, population, 20,000, if that, you know, on all of Islay. And here they are putting out this, like, pretty groundbreaking spirit in a bottle like this. And with this kind of really interesting attitude, right? Like right back at the beginning, they were putting out releases like Islay barley or Bur barley, B-E-R-E. So they were mucking around with alternative grains, mucking around with grains from specific farms and specific locations and so on. They even had a series a few years later called Micro Provenance, where they were bringing out distilleries and spirits and stuff from like really specific locations. And this was in an era when, you know, like people just didn't talk about that. You know, in 2010, right? Like you were there, Craig, like in 2010, people just didn't talk about barley. You know, barley was there just to give you yield. It was just a form of starch, something to give you alcohol, and the rest was just kind of in the, you know, up in the ether. So for these guys to come out and say, not only is the barley really important, but where it comes from is super important, and actually like put that front and center on the bottle, and like say, hey, this is something we should be talking about, is pretty groundbreaking actually.
Absolutely.
For me, like Mark Renier, so he was the guy that you saw talking on the screen just before. He comes from a wine background, as you kind of mentioned there. And like the thing for me about wine, I mean, my background's in wine as well, but they talk about a few things in wine they don't talk about in whiskey nearly as much. In wine, they always talk about the grape variety, right? You pick up a bottle, you go out there, you pick up even the cheapest bottle you can find, and there's a grape variety on the front of the label. Then there's usually where it came from, right? So the actual place, that seems pretty important. So they put the place where it came from on there. And they also put the year. That also seems pretty important as well, right? It's a natural thing. So here they are, Bruichladdich, 2010, 2011, 2012, and even before that actually, going out there and saying, not only is it the grain that matters, it's where it came from, and it's the specific type of barley it is. And all of that is a really important thing for what made these guys, and really sort of started to stir the pot, I guess. Yeah.
And influenced us.
Yeah, 100%.
100%.
Yeah.
We are highly influenced by the concept of exploring barley, exploring flavour, which is cool. The thing about Bruichladdich, so in 2012, an international company, I always pronounce it wrong, Remy Martin, is it?
Remy Martin, yeah.
Yeah, Remy Martin.
You sounded better.
A bit more French.
Yeah.
So Remy Martin came in with a bucket load of money, put it on the table and said, we want Bruichladdich, right? Private investors in Bruichladdich, a large group of small investors. Overwhelmingly, they said, we'll take the money. So Bruichladdich had been going 10, 11, 12 years, something like that, right? The one guy who was not happy about it was Mark Renier. So Mark Renier threw the toys out of the cot, right? And went, I'm out of here. I think he took a still with him too. It was a still which was outside. Yeah. They had a display still outside the front of Bruichladdich. And he goes, that's mine. He's taken it. And then he chuffed off to Ireland. And he chuffed off to Ireland because of what said on the video. It was believed that Irish barley was the best barley, right? So he purchased an old, it was Guinness? Was it Guinness?
Guinness factory.
Yeah,
Guinness, state-of-the-art Guinness brewery, and it shut down. So he bought a brewery for a song, and then set about converting it to a distillery, and that became Waterford. And we'll tell you the Waterford story as we go along.
It was pretty interesting actually. I was seeing videos of it, and this was like a full state-of-the-art, Mickey Mouse, like the Ducks Nuts kind of joint. And there was so many bells and whistles. There's just videos of guys hauling pipes and valves and stuff like that off stuff because they didn't need it all. There's just a giant mound of bloody equipment that's just in the corner there because I don't know what the hell to do with it.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
All right, so we will now move into the Waterford side of it. So remember, as I said, have fun. If you've got a comment, shout it out. If you've got a question, shout it out, right? So, holy fuck! We've got the head distiller of Waterford up in the room.
Hi, Craig. Hi, Crafty. Hi, guys.
Ned, how are you, bud?
I am very, very good. And you, sir?
Oh, mate, you know how good I am. You know how much I've been wanting to do this and how long we've planned this.
Yeah, it's you've pestered us for a good while, so eventually you had to give in.
Yeah, that's what we want. Right, so I want everyone in the room to give Ned a great Australian welcome. Everybody.
Hang on. I thought it was New Zealand.
Say again, Ned.
I thought it was New Zealand I was talking to.
Oh, sorry, wrong thing, mate. So hands up in the room who would like to have Ned in Australia doing this now. Yay! But he's not. We're doing it. So this is a very, very unusual arrangement, right? So Ned was going to come on at the end as a bit of a surprise, and it was going to be sort of a Q&A session. You know, anyone's got any questions, ask the head distiller. But Ned goes, no, mate, I'm coming for the whole thing. This is going to be fun. I want to be in the room. So Ned is in the room, people. Ned is in the room.
Yeah, okay.
I wanted to shoot the shit with everyone else, like.
Let's kick it off. So, it's number 2, is it?
Yeah, we're not doing number 2
Oh,
because that's so
shit.
heavily peated.
Which one is the Rath Eden? What number is Rath Eden?
It's number 3.
Number
So I'll just say to the room, everyone, so number 2 is actually heavily peated. We're going to come back to that last. So skip number 2, that's the one in front of you in the middle, and go directly to number 3.
All right, so we are drinking Rath Eden. And I will start to tell you the story of Waterford, and hopefully I don't embarrass myself, Ned, but we'll see how we go, eh?
Work away, I just covered my face if you sat in wrong like that, like, you know what I'm saying?
Okay, why do we have a love of Waterford? Why do we have a fascination with Waterford? And it's very much centered around the concept of whiskey terroir. And not some airy-fairy marketing thing, an actual scientifically, factually based thing. So Waterford embarked, Mark Rainier wanted to take what he started at Brookladdy and continue, right? Which is chasing flavour, chasing barley. Big believer in barley. Yeah, whiskey is an agricultural-based product. So you wanted to speak of barley. Scotch-centric marketing, and don't get me wrong, I'm not bagging Scotch, is 80% of the flavour comes from the barrel. So you think about that and you go, 80% of the flavour comes from the barrel? So the barrel's doing all the heavy lifting. But what about the barley? And Scotch-centric marketing says that the further you go down the manufacturing process, the least impact it has on flavour. So what's right at the start? Barley. So barley doesn't actually contribute flavour, so it's not really important. The reality is barley is very important. But when you're using high starch content barley, which translates to high alcohol yield, so everything's driven by the dollar, right? You are using a barley which will give you your maximum return, right? But what happens is one of the things that's traded off is flavour, right? Waterford have gone down the line of exploring barley in different ways, but one of the things they've done, which is, I think Mark Rainier said it, he didn't say mindfuck, but it is, it's a mindfuck, right? Is to explore.
He said it.
He said mindfuck. Okay, all right, good. It's a mindfuck. And the mindfuck is you have terroir and wine. And Rainier came from a wine background. He was a wine merchant, as you saw on the video. And what he said is we need to understand barley and contribution of flavour to barley. So Waterford systematically set about working to basically grow barley in different parts of Ireland, right? And different soils, different, I'm going to say altitude, but you guys don't have altitude. Different, everything was different. And it was specific farms, right? So when they started, they went, right, okay, that's good. Okay, now what do? Well, we've got to malt the barley, right? We want to keep it separate. So what they did is they built this room called the cathedral. Is that right, Ned?
100%, yeah. Purpose-built shed.
Purpose-built shed with bays.
With individual bays, yeah.
Individual bays. So individual bays with farm-grown barley, specifically for Waterford. So you're drinking, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, Rath Eden. I pronounced it right.
Perfect. No, perfect.
Anyway, so this is a specific farm, right? They then mill, brew, ferment, distill everything fairly standard, as standardized as possible. They then go into a standard barrel program. And Ned, do you want to comment on the barrels that you use in your standard format?
So each farm goes into roughly the same percentage breakdown. It's 50% ex-bourbon barrels, 20% American virgin casks, 15% French wine casks, and they're nearly always right around the Burgundy, Bordeaux area. So we'd have Chateau Lafite, Mouton Rothschild, Margaux, and the reason we use those casks, I think most people think it's because of the wine. Not necessarily. They buy the best casks at the very start from the likes of Loge and Limousin Forest with really tight grains, and they'll only use them for one or two wines, so the wood has a lot left to offer us. We actually steam clean the casks when they get here, and the last 15% is of the casks that we use is what we call VDN, or Vin du Natural, so sweet fortified wines, sherry, port, Madeira, Riesling. So I'm talking about, they're not seasoned sherry casks, they're old 30-year-old casks. So the wood is probably fairly tired, but a lot of sweetness in the cask to extract. Because we're a natural whiskey, we don't use colorings and additives and stuff like that. So that's what we do. And then when we get to bottle, we can use each cask as an ingredient. That's kind of the way we work it.
So it's
Crafty, can I ask a question? You say barley is where the barley is the most important thing.
good.
So barley's got a husk on it, and it's got outer layers, whatever. With the Japanese, with their rice, they polish the rice, they take the outer edges off, get the starch out of it. Is there a similar thing which is done with barley for whiskey, where you polish the rice, basically grind it down so you're only getting the centers, or do with these particular barley farms that you have and your different plots and your purpose-built set, is it just as it is?
Do you want to comment on that, David, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably one for Ned, but yeah, like in my opinion, like what these guys at Waterford are doing are basically, they're trying to describe the place it's from. So there's this very fancy French word called terroir, basically means the place it's from. It's trying to describe it.
Sense of place.
Yeah, it's a sense of place. So it's about, what they're basically doing is they're taking this barley, for the purpose of this conversation, say it's the same barley, right? And they're putting it, they've had it grown in all these different locations, and the flavour difference you see from those locations is a reflection of where it's grown, the place it's from.
Oh, I totally get that. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether you polish the barley.
Maybe I come in on that there with the barley and stuff.
Go, Ned.
No, we don't do any polishing or anything like that. Just so if we've worked with over 120 different farms at the moment, and we've a malt store called Minch Malt, so it's actually Minch Malt to work with the farmers. But when we get the grain in, it's green barley and it's stored below 14% moisture. So when it comes in, it's just cleaned up and it's stored below 14%. It gets malted then, and when we get it malted in Ireland, you're allowed to use an enzyme called gibberellic acid, which speeds up the process and gives you more available starches. I suppose we don't use that. And when we get to the distillery, then most breweries or distilleries will have either a hammer mill or a roller mill, and we have neither, because when Diageo spent 40 million euros, in 2003, they bought in new technology, and we got a wet mill. It's a Mura wet mill, so we actually mill underwater. So we don't have the conventional husk and flour and stuff. It's actually grinded underwater. So you have a stationary disc and a rotating disc, and you crack open the grain, and it's done underwater. And the reason they bought in that was to eliminate oxygen at the very early stage, because, as you all know, beer and oxygen don't get on. So they bought in that. So yeah, we don't do any cleaning of the barley. It is the barley from the fields, and we also have at the moment we're doing biodynamic barley. So we have conventional barley, we have organic, we have biodynamic, we have peated, and we have heritage grains. And when the grains come in, you can actually see a difference. Some of the biodynamic and heritage grains are smaller and harder. So every farm has to be milled individually. So we'll see the difference, but we don't do any alteration or cleaning up on it like rice with polishing. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and we'll cover off organic and biodynamic as we work through the set.
To go back to like your point there about polishing and so on. So there are some barley varieties that are completely hull-less, so you can buy them. It's like similar to what you get from the health food store as well, and they perform exactly the same. The hull doesn't give you any flavour or anything like that. It just gives you a filtration media. For someone using a Mira mash filter, that's the word.
Yeah.
They don't need to worry about that or anything like that. So it's probably less about the polishing. I mean, Nick, you do a bit with rice, and obviously that has an impact, but for barley, probably not.
Yeah, rice. If you had like a brown rice with a husk, that gives you really heavy, earthy flavours, and it can actually be quite strong and overpowering. So with the rice whiskies we're doing, we actually do go into polished rice, and that does change the profile of the product.
So going back to Rath Eden, what you're tasting now, it's fruity, it's light. It's not a cask which is dominated. This is balanced, and you're tasting the barley, right?
I finished mine.
No. So it's one farm, and I think Ned, you said 150 farms from memory, right?
Yeah, we've used about 120 now at this stage, different farms.
All right. So every farm is treated individually. It's malted, it's brewed, it's fermented, it's distilled, it's barreled. Everything is as consistent as possible. The main variability is the barley.
And just on the barley.
So can signs from Great Southern Distilling Co. in WA. G'day, Cam, distiller. One of the early modern day distillers in Australia has a question. Ed. Ned. How many tons of barley a year are you doing overall?
The first, I suppose, we started distilling in 2016, and up to last year we were doing about 2,500 tons of malted barley. Just with gas prices and barley prices and everything, we've cut back a bit because, believe it or believe it not, it's actually more expensive to buy Irish barley than it is to import it from Australia, the Ukraine, Belgium, England. It's more expensive to buy Irish barley. So we've probably cut down. This year we're going to do about 1,900, 1,900 tons of malted barley. Each farm that we do, we get 75 tons of malted barley per farm, and that gives us about 8 brews, which is 4 wash packs, which is about 20 runs of distill.
So every farm has a unique flavour profile, right?
And one of the things we found was we actually Mark wanted to do a terroir project because, as you said earlier, Crafty, a lot of people don't think terroir exists in whiskey. So we actually did a scientific study with a guy called Dr. Dustin Herb for Oregon State University, and he did a peer review paper. The Department of Agriculture was involved in Ireland, and Tacklock and Thompson, who are the independent, I suppose, specialists in whiskey and spirit analysis in Scotland. They were involved, and at the end of it, we were able to prove that terroir exists with Mark on his piece of paper. But one of the actual unintended findings, I suppose, was that we discovered that barley varieties had less of an impact on flavour than we expected. because they're so closely bred now together, they're crossbred, so they're half brothers or sisters, or they could be kissing cousins, that kind of a term, I suppose. So the lineage is very close. So that's why we kind of looked at some of the heritage varieties as well, because we were surprised at how little impact the actual barley variety had, and the soil, the topography. Even though he said we don't have much altitude, there's a bit of a difference, and the climate has on the barley itself.
So Ned, what you're talking about in terms of barley varieties is a lot of the modern industrial ones, there wasn't much difference. But if you go outside the industrial ones, there was a lot more difference. Is that right?
Yeah, with the heritage and the organic and the biodynamic, there's a huge difference. So I suppose we've probably done about 12 different barley varieties, I suppose, since the start. In Ireland, you're given, the Department of Agriculture has certain barley varieties which are approved every year. So that's the way that works. So I think we're probably down to 3 or 4 now at the moment each year that we use, and they're usually the barley is usually in geographical areas. Like, so, Wexford might have Irina, the Midlands might have Taberna or something like that, because it's just it might grow a little bit better there, or the maltster will use a depot there with that.
Right, I think it's time we need to drink some more whiskey, and I'll answer that question. So Mark McKellen said, with 120 individual barleys, is that then 120 whiskies to manage? Each farm is a release. That's it. Yeah, we're going to move on to the Q&A. Potentially. Yeah. So we're going to move on to the cuvee. That's I'm the next speaker, so you got me again. Yeah, joy. So we're on the cuvee. What the hell is the cuvee? So Waterford's on a journey, right? And their journey is to make the most profound whiskey in the world. Not the best whiskey in the world. There's a distinction between the two. The most profound whiskey in the world. Barley is the most flavoursome cereal grain in the world. That's undisputed, right? You can pick up something like 2,000 flavour notes in barley, right? It's phenomenal. So if you think about Waterford, you've got all these farm releases. You've got it all matured in standard barrels. You're releasing it at a standard 50% ABV across the board, right? If you get different farm releases, you will see the different flavour profiles, and you will swear they're different whiskies from different distilleries. Now, we're only tasting one farm release today, Rath Eden. Josh has got a couple of other farm releases for sale, and I suggest if you can do it, score 2 bottles of Waterford farm releases, drink them side by side, and it's, to quote Mark Rainier, mindfuck. That's what I'd say. But now we move on to cuvee. What's cuvee? So cuvee is taking the individual farm releases and treating them as elements to make whiskey. So they blend, I hate the word blend, but different farm releases and created the cuvee release. Ned, would you like to comment further on the cuvee and the ethos behind it and where you're going with it, mate?
Yeah, so I suppose when we do the single farm, it's to showcase the farm itself, the flavours from the farm. And when we do the cuvee, it's bringing together, in this case, there's 25 different farms. It's bringing together, I would always say, a marriage of farms. Because when you say blended whiskey, a blend of whiskey, some people, might think it's different whiskies from different places, but we're looking to give that layers and complexity. And as you can see, the guys are wearing the lovely cuvee shirts. And I'll just give a quick comment on the label, because it was actually a bespoke piece of art done by an Irish artist called Leah Houston, and it kind of adds to the bottle, I think. So it's lovely. And if anyone has power outages and is in the dark, the squiggly bit actually glows in the dark. So if you're even if you're not into whiskey, if you don't like it, just buy it, and that way you'll have something to drink in the dark. But but yeah, so we're looking for layers of flavor. We're looking for complexity. We're looking to give you a millefeuille, I suppose, of flavors. It's the same concept as wine. And I just see someone is throwing in a question there about the color. Yeah, it's a natural color. So a lot of the color of whiskies you'll see is because of a caramel additive. When we buy our virgin American cask, we get them done at char 3. But obviously, there's a bit of a myth out there that, mentioned earlier that maybe 70 or 80% of the flavor comes from the cask. And I've often seen distilleries with, barrels where it says the color after 1 year, 5 years, and 20 years. And, I've casks that our oldest cask is 7 years old, I suppose, in a first fill cask, and it's not like that color. So that's one of the reasons the bottle is blue. Same as Bruichladdich, you can't see the color. And it's also the county color of Waterford is blue and white. But just with I suppose the cuvee, I want it to be a drinkable whiskey. You want it to be really drinkable, but something that you can sit down and it challenges you. And what I like as well is when you go back to taste it the next time, you'll get different notes. Like, on the nose and stuff, I'm getting a kind of a red apple, and I always have to remind myself to say it's barley forward. Our whiskey is barley forward. And what I love as well is we have great oils. And I'd always say to the distillers, the oil should be like my legs, slow and thick. So it's easy enough to remember. But the slow those oils come from the slow distillation and the bit of reflux as well. So that's important. And the other thing I find with whiskey is it's an atmospheric drink. Like, we are here now and we're smelling it and tasting it, and we never do master classes and Dad, we're not doing master classes, having a chat and having a drink. And the whiskey is slightly different then. You're having the crack with the friends. There's probably someone sitting beside you in the audience there that you've never met before, and you're having a conversation over it. And that's what whiskey is about. It's about experiencing it. Like, you go for a walk in the rain, you come home, the dog is all covered in shit. You're getting given out to for bringing in your muddy gumboots and stuff like that. You have a drop of whiskey and it tastes different because you might get some of those heavier notes and stuff. So for me, it's an atmospheric drink. You missed the intro. But what I said is this is not a master class. This is a craft class, right? Yeah. And anyone in the room can throw up a comment, throw up a question. This is conversational. Whiskey is ritualistic, right? It's a drink of conversation, right? And you guys are whiskey lovers, and you're here in the house of Waterford tonight, partaking in this. And who's in the house? Well, bring him on. Who is it? Who is it? It's Mark Rainier.
Yeah, hi guys. Hi.
There goes the whole show. There goes the whole show.
Oh, no. Hey, hang on, everyone. Now we give a real Australian cheer. Come on, everyone, do it.
Well, thank you very much.
We want Mark and we want Ned in Australia. Come down, guys. We will look after you. Trust us. We will.
We'll be there. Well, thank you very much. It's really sweet of you. I was listening to what you were saying there, and I think what Ned never says is, just how good he is at putting bottlings together. So I'm going to blow smoke up his arse by saying, putting bottlings together is a difficult thing at the best of times. But what I asked Ned to do at a very early stage was to play with the most extraordinary library of maturing spirit there's ever been, because no one's ever done, what we set out to do with Waterford. We started the work at Bruichladdich, but really this is where we've perfected it. And so it's like a kid in a sweet shop. The guy has at his fingertips the most diverse, at least 110 different farms that we've distilled. And therefore, I mean, Mark McCullum there, I see that quote about the cuvee, a blend of 25 different barleys. No, it isn't. It's 25 different versions of Waterford single malt. It's a single malt. So each one of those components is a single malt in its own right. That we've bottled up some of them as single farms to show people the difference. But here, Ned has brought together the characteristics of those 25 component single farm distillates, all single malt whiskies, Waterford single malts, and he's brought them together to create those layers of flavor to provide complexity. And that's what we're after here, is complexity. You know, when you're setting up a distillery, you're not going to do, well, I'm going to do what everybody else does. You want to do something different. And it comes back from the very elemental idea that whiskey is an agricultural, it's heretical, I know, but whiskey is actually an agricultural produce. And everybody forgets that. That's what it always was. And it's become this, you know, manufactured product, you know, bringing things from all over the world together, barley from the Ukraine, barley from Australia, but, you know, all brought to Scotland, all brought to a place, assembled together, sent away for maturation elsewhere, bottling in Glasgow or Edinburgh, whatever. It's lost that vibe, that original thing, that it's agricultural, it's flavor. And remember, there's 2,000 of them in malted barley. You know, that's the flavor of whiskey. The whiskey, single malt whiskey, and I'm only talking about single malt, is its flavor comes from the barley. Nowhere else, the barley. 2,000 flavor compounds. We know, because we've done the research, we've done the projects over 3 years. 2,000 flavor compounds are in the grain, and they're immutable. They don't go anywhere. They're in the grain, they're in the new spirit, and they end up in the mature spirit. Now you'll say, okay, well, how come, you know, those flavor compounds are the same as new spirit and the same as mature spirit? Well, they are, bizarrely. What we now know is that those flavor compounds start to microoxygenate through the barrel. And that microoxygenation gives the flavor compounds, they sort of gang up to create the impression of other flavors, or they subvert to create the impression of other flavors. But the actual flavor compounds don't go anywhere. They're there in the grain and they're there in the bottle. It's fascinating what we're discovering. Well, we're discovering because we want to know. We want to know why. You know, when you've got the most flavorsome cereal in the world, producing these compelling, flavor-rich whiskies, the very flavor of whiskey. Well, you know, as Ned said, you know, oh well, you know, you get the industry saying 80% of a whiskey's flavor comes from the wood. No, it doesn't. It's the flavor compounds you put in the barrel in the first place. If you put
100%.
vodka into a barrel, you don't get whiskey. I can tell you that. You know, you come to Waterford and we'll let you try, because we have one for the unwary.
If we don't like it, you can have a sup of that.
Yes, exactly. You know, so I mean, and it would be a fuck sight cheaper just putting it into you know neutral alcohol into wood. But no, it's the flavor compounds. And whilst people want to sort of draw your attention away from barley to wood, because it's smoke and mirrors, it's easy to talk about wood, finish this, finish that, finish the other. How about asking the question, what about the beginning, not the finish? How did you start? You know, and this is the question that you guys need to be asking.
And Mark, believe me, we are.
Yeah, because you know, it's you know, wood is terribly important. Don't get me wrong, terribly important. but less for the reasons people are being led to believe. You know, if you've got one pipeline, the cheapest liter of alcohol possible, and they're very good at it, believe me, and I take my hat off to that consistency and that continuity, which is after all what those big companies are after. What the marketing guys are saying, well, okay, let's take that single pipeline and we'll just scattergun it through 5, 6, 7 different finishes. And hey, presto, we've got 5 or 6 different products. Well, what we're saying is from the ground, from the soil to the bottle, these are all unique, standalone, individual, single malt whiskies in their own right. And there are ingredients which we can now assemble together bit by bit, flavor by flavor, to create mindfuckery. And that's what
mindfuckery. He said it. Mindfuckery. But I've got to ask this question because for years I've wanted to ask you this question. So when you originally released Bruichladdich, and it was in a blue shrink bottle, and it was fuck you to the Scottish, right? We're doing it our way. We're not doing traditional Scottish whiskey, right? And you've been on the progression, the journey about barley and telling the story of barley, right? And we love it. We absolutely love it in Australia. So you're going against the Scotch marketing machine, right? The Scotch marketing machine, which has been 80% of the flavour comes from the barrel. Don't get me wrong, I'm not back in Scotland. I love Scotch. And barley, further you go down the manufacturing process, the least impact it has. So barley doesn't really have much flavour, so don't worry about it. What sort of resistance have you encountered, particularly in Waterford, because you're taking it to another level in Waterford? So what sort of challenges do you have from a marketing perspective and countering it? Or are you just out there just going, fuck it, we're telling our story, take it for what it is. You like it or you don't.
Well, that was, you're saying about, traditional whiskey and Bruichladdich. Well, I mean, it doesn't get much more traditional. It depends what you mean by that. If you mean taking it back to the ground, taking it back to the farm, taking it back to its origin, well, then that's really traditional, isn't it? The thing is, I think you need to understand how we got to where we are. This all started with crofters growing barley to eat, to make bread, to do that sort of stuff, and then distilling a little bit on the side, and in their own homemade still. And it sort of got out of hand, and more of it was converted into alcohol. The governments had to do something about this revenue, about this, and of course on Islay it got to extremes where they're pretty worried about the drunkenness and starvation, the two things going hand in hand. So the idea was, well, we've got to control this. We've got to get some money out of this, and we've got to control it. So they came up with this idea of two things. One, you've got to have a license to distill. So they can make, the Crown can make some money. Okay, 10 quid for a license to distill. We're going back to 1815, I think it is. The other rule was, if you can't beat them, join them, which is everybody can distill. It's just, you've got to have the minimum capacity has to be 200 gallons. And of course, overnight that wiped out all the one-man band crofting distillers. Why bother? The guys, and get this, the guys that had the barley, that's the primary ingredient. The guys that had the barley, they were the ones that said, well, look, leave it to me. I'll chuck out the cows and the horses and the children and whatever, and I will shoehorn in the biggest stills possible, and I will pay the license, and I will do the maximum capacity. You guys, the rest of you, my neighbors, you don't need to bother. I'm going to do it. And that's the beginning of the farm distilleries, going from one-man band to farm distilleries. on Islay, you see that. You still see it. In Ardbeg, Lefroy, Bowmore, the original farm buildings are still there. And of course,
I've just got to interject for a sec because we've got a room full of thirsty people. So we're gonna dip into the organic whiskey now. Luna. No, organic. Organic is
biodynamic.
Luna. Oh, sorry, Luna. Sorry, Gaia. So we're going into Gaia
first. Yeah. Okay.
Mark, if you want to hang around, please do. It's so awesome to finally have a conversation with you, and we'd love to talk for hours and hours because it's such a deep dive topic. These guys are going to have a drink. We're going to continue.
For God's sake, do. Drink. Drink.
Before you go, Nick, Dave, you got any questions you want to ask, Mark?
I've got a comment actually. I really liked. I've got probably two very small ones. I completely agree with what you're saying, Mark. And my big thing for me is that great whiskey doesn't start its life in the distillery. Great whiskey starts its life in the field, in the paddock. And it's that idea of actually having a sense of where something's come from that's really important. I think you'd probably agree with that. And the other comment is about this idea of the grain not really mattering, I suppose.
Yeah.
We see a lot of this, is this kind of idea that the grain's just there as this vehicle, right? It's just there to give you our fermentable alcohol, and that's basically it, right? And, the cask is doing, 80% of it, and there's a still shape and all the rest of it. That matters as well, and, all the rest of it. And what's left over is maybe this tiny little bit. But from my perspective, if it's the barley that doesn't matter, and, if you talk about Scotch whiskey, they say there's only whiskey's made of three things, right? It's barley, yeast, and water. That's what they say. I leave out the barrel, but, anyway, we'll forgive them that. If that one of those three things is not discussed, right, then surely that has to play an impact. And if it doesn't have an impact on the actual spirit, well, then why does whiskey taste different to cognac? Why does whiskey taste different to rum? If it doesn't have an important fundamental difference, then what's the category all about?
It's laughable, isn't it? It's laughable.
Yeah, 100%.
But of course, what you guys said, it's the narrative, the whiskey industry narrative, and they spent a lot of money spreading this over a long time, which is, don't look at the barley. It's coming from Timbuktu. It's coming from all over the place. It used to come from the farm, as I was saying earlier. It used to, but then as those farms got bigger and bigger, well, then, they needed to get it, and transport got better. You could bring barley from wherever you wanted. You could bring coal from wherever you wanted. And that sort of changed the whole shooting match, the whole game. But remember, what you're getting at is the big guys, it's a commodity product for blending. They never expected single malt whiskey to be a thing. It was for blending. So when the barrels all dried up, because of the lack of importation of barrels, wines were being bottled in France instead, and so those barrels never appeared. When the recycling of barrels had to take off in the 70s by an economic imperative, just the lack of new barrels coming into the UK, combined with global commodity barley, well, the story is not going to be about that farm here or that place there, or that barley makes a difference. No, but it was always destined for blending, and that changed by accident in sort of the 80s when single malt got out, and all these old distilleries that had already been shut down. They were shut down in 73. The oil crisis of OPEC, those distilleries and their stocks started appearing on the market in the late 80s. And that was the catalyst for single malt whiskey. That's what made it take off. Two things. One, it was distilled better in smaller distilleries, and the barley was better because it was the original barley varieties that had evolved with minor input Whereas from 73 onwards, the barley varieties were propagated for the industry, by the industry, for yield, spirit yield, field yield, disease resistance, climate adaptability, straw height, but never for flavor. And what's worse, when we did our terroir study, the world's first, which is published on our website, you can go and see, we're not making this up. Terroir, 60% of the flavors are influenced by terroir. That's a scientific fact. 2,000 flavor compounds. But the downside of it is that the parents of all modern barley propagated since 73 came from the same parents. All modern varieties, every whiskey you're drinking, wherever you are in the world, came from the same original parents in 1973. And those parents, unfortunately, we have discovered, were cousins.
Kissing cousins.
Genetically too similar. And so therefore the same flavor compounds have been propagated for 50 years. That's the problem. So you need to go back to those barley varieties before they started homogenizing it. So when you look at the whiskies out there of the big companies, they can't talk about barley because they screwed it up. They can't talk about provenance because they don't have any. So the narrative is barley doesn't matter. Look at the stills. Look at the stills. Look at the big shiny stills. But as we all know, distilling, I don't want to disabuse anybody, but really the difficult thing, the complicated thing is the fermentation. It's the extracting of those flavor compounds.
You're letting the secret out there, Mark.
Distilling is cool schoolboy chemistry. There's three things. The size and shape of the still. Well, we know that. Yeah. We've known that for 100 years. Then it's that middle cut, which nobody ever bothers to talk to you about. But what's the relevance of that middle cut? The more miserly you are with that middle cut, the narrower the band. We take 10 degrees middle cut. The purer the spirit. It's as simple as that. The wider the cut, you get more spirit, so it's cheaper, but it's thinner. So the middle cut is very important, and finding where the optimum is obviously essential. And then the other thing is how fast you take that middle cut. And we do, and Ned's probably told you, a trickle distillation. We take it down to 300 liters per hour. It gloops out. You can see the thickness. That's where what the French say, the gras, the oiliness, the mouthfeel, the richness, which you are seeing in everything here. That's where it comes from. So that's what you need to know about distilling. It's how greedy or how fast you're going to be for economics, or how slow and how miserly you're going to be for quality. And then, of course, the fermentation, we have the ability to temperature control. So that's one of the great things about buying the Waterford Brewery, was all this kit was there. So I've always wanted to be able to temperature control, to extend the fermentation, to get that intensity of flavor. So we ferment 6 times longer than the big boys, 6 times. We even get a malolactic fermentation, which adds to that softness. And then going back to the milling, well, we don't mill normally. We mill anaerobically, which is why you smell barley. Unlike any other whiskey you've ever tasted, every one of these, you smell the barley, because that milling happens underwater. We keep that barley aroma. It doesn't disappear in a mill house. We've captured it. And then, of course, by using a mash filter, we squeeze pneumatically every last drop of flavor from that barley, which is why barley forward, terroir driven. And that comes through here. You're drinking an organic whiskey. This is.
We're about to start. We're about to start drinking it, right? We just got one more question for you. One more question, Mark, and then we'll rip into the organic. We'll rip into the biodynamic. So
I really like that too. Yeah.
Nick from Dusty Barrel. So Nick is he makes whiskey. He's a craft distiller like myself and like Dave. But his specialty is rice. But he's going to ask you a question.
So with Brook Laddie, so now that you've moved on and got Waterford, have you seen a change in ethos with that business at all?
Well, I mean, inevitably you do. I mean, I couldn't go back for at least 10 years. It was too painful. But inevitably, there's twice as many people and half the ideas, which I think is always a bit of a sad thing, because any big company, it's about how they optimize, and so I think the esprit goes, the innovation goes. As they drill down onto the bits that they want to work. I mean, it's well known how how I didn't want to sell Brook Laddie to anybody at the time.
Yeah.
But if it was ever going to be one company, Remy is certainly the right company. They're very, very good custodians, and it gives me tremendous good feelings to see how they can take what you started into a completely different stratosphere. Yeah, okay, it may be a bit more conformist than it was, but that's inevitable. No, so they're a good company, and I'm very pleased to see Octomore carries on, Port Charlotte carries on. They're not so much into the terroir anymore. I think they found that, as we did, logistically very difficult to do on Islay, which is the reason I went 240 miles south to Waterford, where we could actually set it out with all the logistics necessary to do this properly. So yeah, I'm very proud of what we did with Brook Laddie. I'm very proud of what that means to the industry and to people that have followed what we did. And I think the way that's been opened for other people, distilling now is wide and mainstream. It's not the bizarre. At the time, this was the first distillery to be bought out of the whiskey industry at the time. Now you look around and people are popping up with distilleries all over the place. So I think we led the way on that front. And what you've now got is this international single malt whiskey sector. It's no longer the preserve of Scotland. It's no longer, it's now. It's out there. Everyone, you guys, the New Zealand, Germany, Sweden, America, even in Scotland. There's a new sector, and it's international single malt, and that's really exciting because that's where you get passionate people like yourselves, doing your own distilling with vision, with imagination. And I think that's where the genuine innovation is coming. And the big guys know this. They know that they can have old whiskey, really highfalutin bottles, and sure. But the agenda is moving on, and it's you guys, it's us that's making that. So I think it's a very exciting era to be a whiskey fan. Because there's so much more happening.
Absolutely, and the term international single malt whiskey, we love that. And just to finish up, Mark, I have just to say a personal thank you, because Brook Laddie is what put me on my journey to where I ultimately created my own distillery making whiskey.
Well, there you go.
And mate, I could talk to you for hours, but I won't.
Well, another time. I'll leave you with Ned. But another time, I'd be delighted. There's so much we could talk about. And I'm sorry.
We'll do a shooting the shit episode, which we were going to do with yourself and Stu Wycross, who is a craft maltster in Australia. And we'll talk about barley, just about barley. And
It's
Ned
where
knows
it's
all
at,
about
man. It's the start. It's where it all
Yeah,
starts.
that's
It's the
not,
barley.
we know. Anyway, we'll let you go. Mark,
Okay.
thank you. Round of applause for Mark Rainier.
I don't know how to get out of this.
And we're back to Ned, but we're back to Nick.
Back to
And
tasting.
we got a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah.
So, Nick, you're in. Go.
Okay, so organic. So as we're talking about 120 different farms. So organic, I think. Ned, I think it's 5 farms currently that are producing.
So when we started, we had 6. There's actually 6 farms, and I have it written down here: Jason Stanley, Paddy Tobin, Trevor Harris, John Malik, Pat Booth, and Alan Jackson, and they all use the Overture variety. So when we started, there wasn't enough farmers. There wasn't farmers growing enough barley for a single batch. But this year we're up to 4 single farm organics. So they've went from 6 of them together to 4 single farms. A huge jump. We kind of said we'll buy it if it's good enough. We'll buy it. So this one there's 6 farms.
Yep. So is it you guys still doing the 500 to 600 barrels a year on the organic?
Oh, gee, we're well past that now. It's a so if we're doing 4 single farms, we're at maybe 800 on that. So in around that. But it's actually funny. We'll be doing biodynamic tasting in a minute, and we just finished our biodynamic mixed biodynamics yesterday, and we only got 81% yield. So you can see that it makes a bit of a difference. But just I love the organic as well, because it gives you that rich earthiness as well. And on this one there's a kind of a summery vibe to it as well. It has a light kind of a sherbety note as well, And I just see a couple of questions coming up, so I might just wrap them up into
a lot of questions.
Yeah. So what does the 1.2 mean in GIA? So when we started, this has been kind of dropped now because it was a little bit confusing, but when we started 1.1, so the first one meant it was the first year's distillation, and the 0.1 meant it was the first bottling from that. So organic 1.2 means it's the first year's distillation and the second bottling from that, if that makes sense. There was another question about whiskey and how we spell it without an E. And it's in Ireland you can spell it with or without an E, and you can double or triple distill it. So we double distill and spell it without an E. So some people would say it's kind of Scottish style. And the reason we double distill it is the style of spirit that we want. And the reason we don't have E in our whiskey is because it's the old way of spelling it. And if you have a bottle there, Crafty or Nick or Dave, that you can pick up, and if you look at the front of it, I have a bottle here, and it says Produce of Ireland, right at the bottom. It says Produce of Ireland. Okay. If people can see that. Produce of Ireland. So I think on nearly every bottle of Irish whiskey, you'll see product of Ireland. And as Mark said earlier on, it's an agricultural produce. So we decided to put the E into produce and not into our whiskey. So we don't have that E158. Okay. And it's not to shit store. It's just that's what we're looking at. We're looking to be probably a little bit different as well from the Irish whiskey, and more that international style. And there was another question about age statement as well. And actually on the back of each bottle, there's a terroir code. So you can see a terroir code here. That's actually for Lakefield, the bottle I have there. And that'll tell you information on each bottling, including the age. And on this organic 1.2, the age is actually 3 years, 9 months, and 20 days. So we have full traceability and full transparency. But it's a bit like the barrels, why people talked about the barrels. The age statement was important because everyone had old whiskey. Now the age statement is less important because they don't have the old whiskey. So when we went into it, our oldest whiskey in cask is just over 7 years old. So our whiskey is going to be young. So the whiskies we're tasting today are between kind of 3 and 4.5 years old. But I think it drinks much older than that. And I don't think anyone has kind of said oh, I don't like it because it's too young. Well, a lot of people have said they're surprised at the age of it. They think it smells and tastes different. So what do people think of this organic?
What do you think of the organic, people? Beautiful. Yeah. Now, Ned, question on organic. So
Yeah.
it's an organic whiskey.
Yeah.
So explain to the audience what that actually means from an organic perspective. And Dave's going to talk about biodynamic, and we'll cover that one off as well later on.
Yeah, so organics is basically we're certified by the Organic Trust as the farmers are certified organic farmers. So no chemicals, no pesticides, natural farming, I suppose. So the ground has to be in organic or without chemicals and sprays. I think it's for 5 years. I think to be certified organic. So it's just an organic farming that's certified. Then they come and they certified the distillery and also where we do the bottling and that. So it's just certified organic, no chemicals, no pesticides, natural. Organic is different than biodynamic. Biodynamic is where the madness comes into it a little bit, but I think it's all different flavors.
All right, let's kick on to biodynamic. So Dave has the last one for the night. So far, you've seen. Sorry, my mistake. We changed the order. So just so you understand, we had the Brooklandy Organic in the middle, and then we went, oh fuck, it's peated. It's really heavily peated. So now we're throwing it right at the back. But now we're going to do biodynamic.
So who's heard of biodynamic before? A few people. Does anyone have any thoughts about what biodynamic is? No idea. You've just heard of it. That's it. This went, we'll move on from there. All right. So biodynamic is pretty interesting. Ned, I'm sure you've got plenty of details as well, but to kind of kick off, biodynamic is kind of this principle. Okay, it was kind of developed by this guy called Rudolf Steiner quite a few years ago. It's kind of a little bit kooky, but it also kind of makes sense in a way. As Ned's put it very succinctly, that's where the madness starts to come in. I think that's the best description I've ever heard of biodynamics before. But so it's about the lunar cycles, right? It sounds pretty kooky.
Yep.
But the whole idea is how you get everything working together. So a lot of people have heard of organic. You can't understand what organic is. Like you can buy it from, Coles and Woolies these days, right? Just buy an orange, it's organic and all the rest of it. And that means there isn't anything inorganic that's involved in the process. Biodynamic is one step further. It's this whole idea about how to get different stuff working together. So for example, if you have a pest problem on your farm, you might introduce geese. You might trundle along, killing all the pests, shitting all over the place, and therefore producing like a little ecosystem, another way of kind of solving the problem. So it's kind of this more holistic idea. It's about respecting the land, and it's also about sustainability of that farm and that land as well. So it's kind of more about actually taking care of the land and the produce that comes from the land. And so it's really this kind of like intense deep dive into understanding, I suppose, how farming can be done and how you can make something really tasty from it. Do you want to add anything to that, Ned?
Yeah, so when I was talking to the farmers and trying to get my head around it, one of the farmers, Trevor Harris, just said that he wants his soil, his earth, in conjunction, in harmony with the earth, with the cycles of the earth and the moon and that. And he also said if he saw a weed growing, he wants to know why is the nutrients going to the weed and not to the plant. The soil is out of sync, it's out of balance, and it needs some alteration. And I usually once a month I don't work on the full moon because I go a little bit haywire. And we all know that the moon affects everything, so it affects the soil and stuff as well. And the other thing is there's certain days where the farmer won't be in the field and he won't be sowing and he won't be working the land, and they're called black days, where the energy is not right. So it's very different, but the flavors are really compelling. just on the age of this as well, it's 3 years, 2 months, and a day old, and even that was a lining on that. It's a really young whiskey, but for me, it's so much soil and earth, and with a lovely kind of a chocolatey note as well. I think is really good. Actually, just a question on the yeast I see coming through. Yeah, we use the same distilling yeast the whole time. We don't change it. We were contemplating working with different yeasts, and we may in the future, but we wanted what I would say is barley is the flavour. At the distillery, we can decide the style of spirit we want by running the stills, and then the casks is the micro-oxygenation.
Yeah. Right, guys. So we're about to finish up with, not quite yet, but we're about to finish up with Ned. Let him go and actually do some work because it's the morning. What time is it there, Ned?
It's coming up to 11 o'clock.
Oh, geez, you've had an easy morning, haven't you?
Yeah. Well, listen, I'm after locking the door and hiding away, but I'm sure someone is waiting outside with something for me. All right, yeah.
Yeah, the chaos out in the distillery. So has anybody got any questions or any comments? Now's your chance to talk to head distiller. And one thing I'd like to let everyone know is this is the first distillery that Ned has been distiller, right? So Mark Rainier wanted Ned, and part of the reason he wanted Ned is because he knew the site, he knew the location, he knew barley and everything else, but he wasn't a distiller. So Ned, mate, cheers, my friend. Cheers to Ned. Cheers to Ned.
I've never worked with whiskey before, and it's funny because when someone asks me what my favorite drink is, I'll tell them the truth. I tell them it's a cup of tea, and then a pint.
All right. So any questions? Any comments? All right, we've got some questions.
Sorry, just so everyone else can hear.
Hi. Are all of these whiskies aged in very similar barrels?
Yeah. So when we start, as I said earlier, they go into 50% American first fill, 20% American virgin, 50% wine, and 15% VDN. But when we do the bottlings, then this biodynamic I have here is 35% first fill, 17% American virgin, 26% wine, and 22% VDN. So there's slight changes. So what I would always say is that each farm is a different starting point, and when they go into the casks are individual because they're all different. If you take a terroir to the next level, there's terroir in the trees as well, like in the staves. And that's it as well. So what I'm looking to do when I'm putting the whiskies together is not to have a cask influence. Like when you hear, finished in this or finished in that, we actually start in the casks, and they stay there unless they're leaking or something. We won't tend to move them. But when you're tasting the whiskey, you shouldn't really taste too much wood, and I don't think you do. I think you taste all the other flavors that come from the barley. There's a nice balance of the casks, and that's something I try and do, is not to have too much of a wood influence, but you do get some vanillas and lignans and tannins that will come through. Hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. Any more questions? Right, the question over there.
Sorry. Come on. Just a simple question. Everything here is at 50%. So what made you decide that's the right percentage to do it at? Because I can see Brittle Lake was done at that as well. Yeah. And I assume it's all non-chill filtered?
Yeah, non-chill filtered, 50% because it drinks really well at 50%. We did play around with some other, going a little bit higher or lower. We have actually an Argo Cuvée coming out, which is 47%, which is kind of the little brother or sister to the Cuvée. It's a younger whiskey and probably a little bit more affordable than 47%. But it drinks really well, and you can add a little bit of water to it. We didn't, we were going to be above the 46% because we weren't going to chill filter, because you know, as you know, when you chill filter, you take away a lot of those molecules and mouthfeel and fatty acids and stuff as well. So yeah, we didn't want to go near that 50% because yeah, it drinks well.
I got a question. Do you think Mark Rainier enjoyed himself?
Yes and no.
Oh, explain.
I think he really enjoyed himself, but when Mark Rainier gets into a flow, he will talk and talk and talk.
We saw your face, mate, and your face was saying, "Oh fuck, here we go again."
Yeah. And listen, he's brilliant, but when you've heard it for 700 times, like, no, but the good thing about it is, I think you did the right thing. You know, you got a nice bit of information from, and keep
Absolutely.
it for, you know, a shooting the shit podcast, like, because you know you'd want to dedicate, you know, you could dedicate 3 hours and he still would have a lot to say, like, you know. And in fairness, it's not, you know, you can throw questions at him, and what he loves is he loves history. He likes like tying it back to history and stuff as well, which is interesting.
So when we do Aussie Craft Distillers Shooting the Shit episode with Mark, and we're going to do it with Stu Wycross from Voyager Craft Malt, specifically about barley and that, you're coming on as well, and you can pull them back when we need to pull them back.
That won't happen. That won't happen.
Mate, we've done two. I think our longest episode of Shooting the Shit was with you, right?
Okay.
It was over 2 hours, and we said, well, he's Irish. He likes a good crack. Well, we're fucked. This is going to go and go and go. And it did. With Rainier, it could be a 4-hour session.
Oh,
so.
yeah, listen. And that's it. But like, he's not, you know, I think he might be seen as a disruptor. And I think what he actually is he's just passionate about what he believes in.
Yeah, we know it.
And like, what the other thing is, we'll never say what we're doing is right and what someone else is doing is wrong. What we'll say is, this is what we're doing. Let's have a chat about it. And if you disagree with it, yeah, we'll talk to you. You know, and that's it. Like, and one of the things I think we found was when we started is that there was less actually pushback from other whiskey in the industry, other people in the whiskey industry, because we had done it so right. We had set it up, like, on the bottom of each bottle. I don't know, can you see that? There's terroir, traceability, and transparency. And it's like a three-legged stool. If you put away one of the legs, you fall over. Take away one of the T's, and, you know, to have true terroir, you have to have traceability and transparency. So when we say we're doing, like, you know, our fermentation time on this biodynamic was 194 hours. Imagine that. Imagine being able to leave it there that long, like, and not be given out to because you need to turn around to get the next thing going, like, you know. So, you know, things like that is good, like, you know.
So one of the things that we need to appreciate in the room is we have a direct relationship with Waterford on the other side of the planet, right? Australia, the craft spirits movement, particularly whiskey, is incredible. The diversity of flavors we have in whiskies. We don't have regionalized whiskies. We don't have Lowlands, Highlands, Spey, Isla, Campbelltown. Every distillery is doing something differently. And we are, as a whiskey nation, excited by what we can do. So Waterford excites us beyond belief because you're doing things that we're doing differently. You're doing it at a whole different level, right? I'll give you an example, just my personal example. And Dave, you want to talk, and Nick, you want to talk. So the whole concept of terroir. So I'm using a particular variety of schooner barley called schooner. Schooner is an older variety of barley. It's a lower starch content. It's a more flavoursome barley. It's a brewer's barley, right? So it's grown in the Riverina. We can track it to the actual farm that it's grown. I'm getting seed from Voyager Craft Malt, and we are growing it in my local area. And it's a trial. It's an experiment, right? But it's a terroir. It's a terroir experience. So I am super excited. Davey Boy, stand up, Davey Boy. Hop and Clover Brewery. Yeah, the Irishman. Stand up, the Irishman. he brews awesome beer, so he's getting some of the barley as well. So, yeah, the whole concept of terroir excites us. So I'm doing my own little projects in my own little way in my own little distillery. Dave, you want to talk about terroir and heritage grains and what it means to you?
God, how long you got?
Yeah, no, separate session.
Yeah.
We're shooting the shit, separate session, all right?
Yeah, I think the point about the barley variety thing is really important. I love what you were talking about, and Mark was talking about there, Ned, about the barley variety and like how the farm treats it. It's such an important thing, and people don't understand that. Like people always talk about this terroir as being this very mystical thing. It's all science, right? It's just science. Like you're taking a barley variety from a place. There's all kinds of bacteria and wild yeast and all that kind of stuff on that barley. You take it into the distillery. The way that that's been malted is a product of where it came from and how it's been grown. So all of this human interference stuff, that's all about how it's actually grown. That's the starting point. It's like you've set up the palette. If you've only got certain colors you can paint with, the painting's only going to turn out a certain way. So it's just science. And when you work with varieties or even things from a unique place, the flavour is just so different. We used a variety recently called Cape. So it was a variety grown in the 1800s in Australia.
Wow.
And you're talking about yield. I groaned, Ned, when you said 80% yield off one of those varieties. So this normally, like, you get a yield of, it's like an extract. It's usually about 82. For this one, it was 60. So we're like 3/4 of the yield, right? So here I was thinking, I really hope this thing doesn't work because this is just going to cost an absolute bomb. And it was absolutely phenomenal. And I still don't know whether it's the variety or we got it from one particular farm that's kind of organic, biodynamic. I still don't know whether it's either one of those, but the phenomenal, like the result was there. And you can put it side by side with just an ordinary, like commercial malt. And anyone in the room would be able to see it's night and day difference.
Yes,
So,
I just come in on that for 1 second, right? And just conventional and biodynamic farming, we'll just take those two. So conventional barley root is about 2 inches, 2.5 inches. Biodynamic barley root is between 7 and 9 inches. So it's going to get much different nutrients from the soil. And also we did the heritage variety, and the first one we did was Hunter. And, it doesn't yield very well. It was discontinued around 1950. And the biodynamic farmers asked, could they use Hunter? So the biodynamics doesn't yield well. Hunter doesn't yield well. It's not going to make much sense, but yeah, we'll give it a go. And last year they used Hunter for the first time, and it gave them the best yield they got so far, up to this year. And the main reason was they found that the Hunter variety, the old barley variety, liked the farming method. It was there was no chemicals involved, and it worked really well. So what you were saying about, was it the barley variety or was it the soil? It's both. It's the interaction of both that will give you that flavour. So it's interesting to see those older varieties and that farming method, how different it was.
Mate, there's a fee for tonight. So we're not getting paid from Waterford, right? But you're going to send over a bottle of Hunter that we're going to partake in because we want to partake in that, my friend. So,
well, sure. James Kellan, who's our sales director, is going out there, I think, next month, and he's going to catch up with you. So we'll let him bring the bottle and look after it. The other thing I want to say on a personal and on a professional note is thanks to the guys, Dave, Nick, and Crafty, kindred spirits across the water, who are our, I won't say pushers because that's not the right word, but who spread our gospel with great enthusiasm and understanding. I think that's the big thing. It's the understanding of what we're doing, and it's an appreciation from me and the distillery as well. So thanks very much, guys.
Mate, that's awesome. Thank you. So before you go, I'm going to finish up with a quick story. So in Ireland, they've done a release which is Irish barley smoked with peat, but they don't call it peat, they call it turf. Turf over there. Turf? Is it turf? Turf, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, the Irish government is banned the use of peat in Ireland. So the Irish country en masse is not happy about this, right? But anyway, I was talking to Ned, and I said, mate, there's a little wee distillery in Australia run by a guy, he's a mad professor called Peter Bignell. And he smokes his barley with sheep shit. And it's fucking awesome. It's fucking awesome. It really is, right? If you haven't tasted holy shit, you want to try holy shit. Anyway, so Ned goes, bugger me. I was talking to someone about that, and in Iceland, they're smoking it with dung. So he said Waterford may consider smoking some Irish sheep shit and seeing what they get.
Yeah, we're talking about it, right? But I just, 1 second now. I'm going to have a look at. I found. So that's the.
Yeah, that's the flocky.
Yeah. So that was interesting, but it's interesting because we've no shortage of sheep here either. But it'll be interesting to see would Mark actually go for it. So I suppose the government they haven't totally banned it yet. So we might get another year or two out of it. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. All right. We'll answer Robert's question in a moment, mate. We'll let you go. We'll let you go and do some real work. Everyone, another round of applause for Ned from Waterford.
Thanks, guys. Roger.
Mate, when you come down here, we'll look after you.
Yeah, well, you better, because
because
I need people looking after me. See you guys. Thanks, everyone.
Good to see you. So that was our little special. To pull that little special to pull Waterford on and get Ned was just insane. To get Mark Rainier is the next level of insanity. But Jesus, he can talk.
Even more than you.
Even more than me. Okay, so now we're on to Brook Laddie. And who's got the Brook Laddie? It's you. Yeah. Go.
So the last dram of the night, it's kind of a nice little bookends. I suppose we started with Brook Laddie, finishing off with Brook Laddie. So this is their 2013 Isla barley, Port Charlotte, heavily peated. Can you guys smell the smoke on that? A little bit. If you're having trouble with that, then you can hand your glass to the person next to you. I'm sure they'll enjoy it. This is, I suppose, they've only started recently doing the smoky Isla barleys, right? I think in the old days, the Isla barley used to be completely unpeated, and it used to be all just from the island. They even used to kind of disclose which farm it was and all the rest of it. I always found from these releases, they're really salty. There's just something about that kind of salty air kind of thing. You ever been to Isla? It's pretty salty in Isla. Everywhere salty, everywhere smoky. I'm actually going there in July. I saw on a map there's a pizza place on Isla, and I'm not kidding you. It's called Pete Zaria.
You got to go and see the photo. So you got to post it, mate.
I got to go to this place. I'm like, Pete flavored pizza. That's just got to be the best thing ever, right?
And they'll go, would you like a whiskey on top of that?
This is kind of the last one here. Hopefully you can taste some of the flavor. I mean, there's a fair bit of smoke in here, but for me, that minerality and that kind of classic kind of Brook Laddie kind of waxiness is really there for this one. Really nice to say.
So you've had a real journey tonight. You've had a real special experience because you've got to try a whiskey which is really not available in Australia. Waterford is, you can get it in Dan's, but it's like a case comes into the country and it's like people in the know, poof, bottle's gone. Oh yeah, sorry, you've got the D word, yeah. That is about to change. So Waterford is about to finally come to Australia. Waterford, as I said at the start, for me personally, is one of the most progressive, exciting, transparent distilleries in the world. It's so fantastic. The journey, and they're only starting their journey. Ned commented about heritage grain. Heritage grain is going back to the days where it wasn't about yields, it was about flavours, right? I'm exploring heritage grains. You're exploring heritage grains. You're not. Well, you are. You are, yeah. But he's doing mainly rice. And that's going to be really exciting when he releases rice whiskey. We're doing things in Australia. We're in some ways ahead of the curve to a lot of countries because we are very much in Australia. Fucking give it a go. Try different things. Right?
To interrupt, right? We're all doing heritage varieties, but their heritage variety is completely different to ours.
Absolutely.
So the flavour and because of where it comes from, it's going to be a completely different.
Totally different, right? But I use barley. It's brewer's barley, right? It's got flavour. It's intense, and no one's having a go at Scotch. I came from Scotch. Dave came from Scotch. Nick came from Scotch. We love Scotch. We still love Scotch. We drink Scotch, right? But the industrial distilleries are very much centred around wood. Who's that? Well, you give me in the hurry up or something. Oh, okay. Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, right. Anyway, we'll wind up. So, but what I'm saying is with Waterford, not only Waterford, there's other distilleries around the world doing some amazing things, right? There's a real movement. There's a real global movement to going back to whiskey as an agricultural-based product. So show it. And on that note, come here, guys.
What are you
Nick,
going to do to me?
Oh, I'm going to kiss you. All right. So that's it. Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. All these lines on the floor. So, guys, I really hope you enjoyed it tonight. This was not a masterclass. This was the Temple of Waterford tonight. And I'll bring back the Aussie Craft Distillers shooting the shit who did fucking nothing tonight. It was all on my shoulders, you bastards. Anyway, we will do a shooting the shit. Or everyone in.
Are we in? Oh, now I'm in.
We're going to get Mark Rainier back on, and we'll give him 4 hours, right? So you want to come, you're more than welcome.
That might be enough.
That might be enough. So again, thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Good night.
Please like, subscribe, follow, all those things. We have in a week's time. Who have we got on? You should know. Who have we got on?
Quick.
Transportation.
Transportation Distillery in Tasmania, Irish style whiskey, funny enough, or triple distill, as you say. Right, cool.
Figure that out.
Yep.
And then followed up by, I think we've got Lee coming up with some.
No, we got
fancy malls.
Austria Distillery, which will be fascinating for those that know. We've got Cape Byron coming up. We got Starwood coming up.
We have Black Dog, and we're going to be putting up a fundraiser as well for Black Dog mental health.
But we've got internationals. We've got Westwood. We're going to do and other ones. But there's one other thing that I'd like to announce tonight, and this is very personal to me. So to finish up.
Oh God. Oh yeah. Right.
So Mark Rainier was only half the equation of Brooklady. Jim McEwen was the other half of Brooklady and other distilleries. Started in Bowmore. He's retired. He's retired like 3 times, and finally his wife said, "That's it. No more. You're done. You're retired." He won't talk to anyone. He won't take interviews. He's out. Right. Jim McEwen wrote a book, an autobiography. This book is the story of a master distiller on the global stage that is held in such high regard. And for me, Jim McEwen is my, put it there.
This one here, so because you can't see it this
Oh,
way,
do it
all
that way.
all that way. This way.
Do it that way, you model. Jesus. So anyway, what I'm saying is Aussie Craft Distillers shooting the shit is going to be importing and selling Jim McEwen's book. This is a book for any new distiller in Australia who comes up to me and goes, I want to distill, I want to have my own distillery. Get that book, read that book, understand what this man is about. He is so important to me. I have a little shrine in my distillery. No, seriously, I do. If you come and see, it's not much of a shrine.
It's actually a little bit,
Says
it's a little bit scary and a
little
little bit
strong.
stalkerish.
and it's covered with
No,
cobwebs.
no, go
Anyway,
ahead.
so if anyone wants to have a look at this book, we're going to be importing it. We've got the rights in Australia and New Zealand. So Aussie Craft Distillers shooting the shit. And why? Because we need to fund our trip to the US.
Yeah, please.
Please support us because we want to go to the US and we want to go to Waterford and other places. So I'll leave the book here if anyone wants to have a flick through it. And if you get on, we'll sort it all out later. But anyway, there's the book. Have a look. And again, thank you. Enjoy. Keep safe.
Thank you all.